Hey, deserving listeners, 90 Day Fiancé. Let's watch. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. As I always say, everything that I produce on this channel may contain triggering material because it has to do with psychology. So keep that in mind. Let's watch.
And I'm not even married. I really feel out of all the men that I have ever dated, Johnny definitely checks a lot of the boxes when it comes to what my perfect husband looks like. So I am not willing to give up on this relationship yet.
So I haven't published my reaction to her storyline lately, but we just heard something that she said. She said, he checks all the boxes of someone of what my perfect husband would look like. What I thought she said is the qualities, the overall qualities, personality, viewpoint, life stage, that kind of thing. But what my perfect husband looked like, it sounds like they might have edited it. I can't really trust that was the exact thing she said, but we can imagine her saying something like that, right? Because she seems to have a thing, and I've been talking about that, and she's quite open about it. She has a thing about Asian culture. Now, from the looks of it, she has a thing about Japanese culture, and he's Chinese, which is completely different. It's just a world away from Japan, if you know anything. And within China, there are thousands of cultures. Within China, there are thousands of cultures, and within Japan, there are, definitely different cultural pockets. It's like saying me and Ella are of the same culture. She doesn't live that far from me. Idaho is right next to Washington State. My family actually grew up in Spokane, which is very close to Idaho. Would you say that me and Ella are of the exact same culture? No. The sort of lifestyle she has, assumptions, everything that she is quite different. There's some overlap, I'm sure, compared to Japanese people or Chinese people. Anyway, point is that we heard that, which is concerning on a certain level. We don't know how Johnny feels about it. There's evidence that he is cool with being seen. There's evidence of him actually doing the same to her in terms of, I always wanted to be with an American girl. I mean, he doesn't really say that explicitly, but anyway. So there was that little comment. Maybe we'll get some more data along those lines. But the other thing that I didn't react to was, I think last week's episode, they were having a conversation about him going to Dubai to quarantine for a couple weeks and then come to the States. And he was talking about Delta. So I'm guessing that this is back when Delta was, first becoming the dominant variant in the world. He was saying, I don't know if I'm going to come, because of COVID-19. And she was saying, how come? And she was getting upset. She was crying, and which, for her to be bummed out and sad and anxious is normal. But her reaction was, no, you're just doing this to make an excuse. There must be some other reason why you're doing this. You don't really love me, or you don't want to be with me. And she kind of had that influence from the outside, if I remember. But she definitely seemed to be taking that way and not listening to him. And he was saying, well, you understand there's a global pandemic right now, right? And people are dying. Millions of people are dying. And I don't want to be one of those people. I also don't want to contribute to it. I don't want to be a vector for someone else. I don't want long COVID. I also just don't want to be sick. I mean, even if I don't die, plenty of people aren't dying but are going to the hospital on a ventilator. I don't want to have that experience. I don't want to get infected and then infect. I mean, he wasn't saying these things directly, but I'm guessing that's what he was thinking, because that's what the science is, and any person with half a brain understands all these things. He was saying that, and she was saying, well, I can't remember the exact same thing she was saying, but she's like, well, it's not that big of a deal, or you've got to do it anyway. Where are your priorities? And he was saying, that's what we call here in China American thinking, which I got a chuckle out of. I will say, most Americans do not think like that. The vast majority of Americans follow the science and the recommendations from physicians and experts, which is a pretty large consensus. Of course, you're always going to find one or two outliers, if you will. Like in my field, there are outliers who believe that our brains are a product of alien technology or something. You can find a psychologist that believes that. Does that mean that psychologists have said that, we're actually alien brain people? therefore it's true. No, you can find outliers. It's all about the consensus. The consensus in my field is that we are not alien brain people. We evolved from previous versions of primates, and so he's saying, it's an American thing. And then it was interesting to hear his perspective, because he was saying, Americans believe in freedom versus risk. They would rather have freedom and take the risk and have a lot of bad outcomes, death, long COVID, killing other people with your vectoring. Whereas we in China we value less freedom while remaining more safe, because and that's the whole thing, right? Is like, if there's a mask mandate or a vaccine mandate, then it reduces freedom, right? And Americans in particular are pretty precious about our freedom, which I get. I mean, I certainly overall am on board with that, right? Like for example, in China, there are certain things that you don't have access to unless you have like a VPN or something. You don't have access to, the government will censor certain stories or news items or something. And so I certainly want to live in a society that allows for the freedom of information. But sometimes, as we can see in today's world, that actually can cause a lot of problems, because you have people who are susceptible to pseudoscience and to propaganda, and people trying to sell things, political people trying to gain power. And so, it's a viable criticism. I don't think I'd ever would have thought that in the past until now we're living in the world of Don't Look Up, the movie. But anyway, so now what I will say is that, and I was wondering if people could really understand the cultural pocket that Ella lives in. Idaho is generally pretty conservative, and there's a good possibility that everyone around her is all on the side of things that is more gaining freedom while taking on the risk. It's all a matter of perspective to some extent, right? Because it's how much freedom are you willing to give up so that you can reduce the risk? And it's very amorphous. It's very intangible for a lot of people. If you just hold a gun to someone's head and they say, like, how much do you want to risk pulling the trigger? People would be it would be less intangible, and people would act in a way that was more in line with what they're seeing. Whereas, a virus, you might be a vector. There's a chance that you're going to have a problem. There's a chance you're going to cause a problem. It's invisible. Do you really know you passed it? It's all intangible. And you have to understand abstract thinking. You also have to have trusted news sources that are surrounding you and propaganda that's surrounding you. I want to say for Ella that it's not like she woke up in the morning and said, I'm just going to have this reckless point of view and put Johnny and all of his family in danger. She, given where she's coming from, I wouldn't doubt that, in Seattle, we've essentially been on different phases of a lockdown since the thing began in March of 2020, almost 2 years ago. Whereas there are parts of the world, I don't know about Idaho, where they've had virtually no measures taken because of the attitude of the constituency. And so she could be living in one of those pockets. Now, you can be angry about that, but the anger really should be directed not at Ella, but at the news outlets and at the politicians and at the people in power who are pulling the strings of propaganda such that people just don't understand the reality. If they understood the reality, they would have a different point of view in all likelihood. So that's what I'll say about that.
Go ahead and give him the other bucket of grain.
All right. So you got my babies trained yet?
No.
Can I pet him?
Doubt it.
You want some hay? Need some hay? I definitely consider myself a cow whisperer. Come here.
Now, while I'm on the topic, and maybe one day I'll do a whole deep dive on this whole thing, I don't really feel like it because there's so much anger on the internet about this whole topic, but I want to get out ahead of certain comments and say that, are there people on the left, people in my camp, even scientists, who are spinning things in a way that doesn't make a lot of sense? Sure. I mean, you're always going to find people making mistakes as we go through this as a, global population. So, can you say, well, masks aren't that helpful, or vaccines have these kinds of potential effects, or even if you get the vaccine, like this could happen, or locking down, there are consequences to that because of economics and the ability to have a human life, at what cost. I get all that. I do, absolutely. And it often isn't really talked about on my side of the political spectrum. It often, if you raise those questions, is seen as being a COVID denier or, someone of an opposite political view. So I'm not saying that there aren't, nuances, but the science is just strong, and we've had even more data from all sorts of things. And don't hate me for saying what the experts are saying, and I don't blindly say what they say. I understand empirical science. I understand how to read research, and I understand mostly how to delineate between good information and bad information. Not always accurate about it when I'm absorbing everything. I've certainly made mistakes, but the arc of observational empirical science bends towards closer and closer to the truth, right? So I'm on the internet, so in my little pocket of Seattleites, I feel like I could just speak normally, but when I'm on the internet, I'm just like, you're speaking to people outside Seattle, and God knows what sort of propaganda they've absorbed, which no one is at fault for, right? People live in certain areas. They live in certain families, and they can't help the propaganda bubble that they're in. And so I just am terrified of the backlash to me saying that I follow the consensus within the medical community. I mean, we live in a world now where me saying, it's like, if you have an abscess on your tooth, the consensus within the dentist community is you have that removed, or there's a treatment protocol for that thing. That's not a controversy. If I said that, people, of course, you go to the dentist and you follow the advice. But somehow when it comes to this topic, because the politicians and the pundits have ruined everything, it's like it becomes like a battleground where literally someone could come to my house and picket because of the things that I just said, as if I'm trying to, ruin people's lives because I'm trying to propagate the ideas that are going to save people's lives. I mean, isn't that kind of messed? Anyway, I don't want to talk about this anymore.
Good idea. I want to delay after he'd already bought the ticket and put in his resignation and everything like that.
Why does he want to wait longer? I mean, I don't understand.
He's worried about the COVID virus.
I don't understand blaming the COVID, because in this area, it is not nearly as dangerous as I think what he thinks it is.
All right, the stats, as always, are complicated, but Idaho is actually pretty low, not as low as Washington, but on the lower end of the spectrum, compared to other states in the United States, which isn't saying much given that we have a pretty moderate rate of death per capita, not as high as some areas of the world. But I'll say, during this time, was not traveling. I would not have traveled. People have been traveling, and people were traveling during this time, so I'm not saying people would be stupid to do so, but I'm saying that it's reasonable for someone to have during this time, even if Idaho had a below average United States, which again isn't saying that much, for someone to say, yeah, it's just not worth the risk for me.
Nothing so much that bad in Idaho Falls, and nothing here in Mackey. So I just don't understand why he's using that as an excuse.
The other thing is, and I said I wasn't going to talk about it anymore, but I'm going to talk about it. So in their small town, I'm going to take the mom's word for it that they have pretty low rates. And I wouldn't be surprised if you're more isolated and you're more rural and there's less contact with other people, then there's less possibility of the contagion moving around. It doesn't eliminate the risk, for sure. I mean, there's certainly rural areas. In fact, in my state of Washington State, the rural areas are the places hit the hardest, probably because of political propaganda preventing people from taking precautions that they need to. But for them, they're saying it's in Mackey, it's not that bad. So I'll take their word for it. But he has to travel. It's not Star Trek. He doesn't just materialize in Mackey. He's got to go to the airport in China. He's got to fly to Dubai. You got to be in box of a plane with a bunch of people. From what I understand, the science is such that being, catching it in an airplane is lower than other places, but, still a chance. You've got to stay in hotels. You've got to interact with a lot of people. You've got to get into a taxi or a bus or something, So by the time he gets there, and then he's got to go home, right? And then if he goes home, he could get infected. He could die. He could infect himself. He could infect them on accident. He could infect his family, his kid. So, I think that's what he's worried about.
So I'm really afraid about the finances.
If I go and if money gets tight, can I depend on you guys to help me?
I love you and I've helped you out so many times.
Okay, we're learning that the parents have helped her out so many times, quote. What does that mean? Does that mean that Ella is just in a family where that is common, or does that mean Ella has troubles with career? Are the job opportunities in Mackie limited? Does this indicate something about Ella's personality? I don't know. Maybe we'll get some more data.
Johnny means the absolute world to me. I need to touch him. I need to kiss him. I need to see for sure what's going to happen when we're together.
Oh, give me a hug.
So this is it. This is going to be the perfect moment.
All right. Well, I want to thank everyone for participating in the conversation below. It's good to get things off your chest, also to support each other and to have exchange of information. I read the comments, and it's helpful sometimes for me to hear your perspective. It's interesting. Also, it's nice when people are saying nice things or giving me updates on their healing process. That's extremely gratifying to me. So thanks for that. You can also join the conversation on Discord and the Facebook fan page and the actual official Facebook page, the Instagram. What am I missing out? The Discord subreddit. And as always, be nice to each other. Be the opposite of toxic. Be the opposite of the typical YouTube commenter, and be nice and supportive and give people the benefit of the doubt, because we all deserve it. We really, really do.